Hello, second graders. It's Mrs. Briggs here with Module 2, Lesson 10's Deep Dive. Today you will need your vocabulary notebook and your Plains Indians book. Today we will use a variety of strategies to understand the word reservation. Repeat after me, reservation. Let's take a look at the word reservation. Reservation is a noun. Do you notice any words within the word reservation? Think about how we look at base words when we have a word that has a suffix. What word do you see in reservation? Did you see the word reserve? Good. Reserve is a verb. Reserve means to save or put aside. I wonder if this definition will help us understand what the word reservation means. I'm going to read a paragraph from our Plains Indians book. It is found on page 38, so you can find it in your book. We're going to read this paragraph and look at the word reservation. Let's look for clues around the word that help us to understand what reservations means. In the mid-1800s, the U.S. government tried to force Plains Indians to move to reservations. Reservations were public lands set aside as homelands for Indians. On reservations, the Plains Indians would have to give up many of their traditional ways of life and depend on the government for support. Remember, when a word is bold like this, that means we'll be able to look it up in the glossary. But let's start by looking for clues around this word that help us understand what it means. Do you see any clues? Good, I see that reservations were public lands set aside for homelands for Indians. So it tells us what the word means. Sometimes authors help the reader by putting the definition of the word right in the text in the sentence following the word. This helps us better understand what the text is saying. Do you remember any other words that were bold that we looked at in another deep dive? Yeah, nomadic was bold as well in lesson number 9. I want you to look in your Plains Indians book for the word reservations in your glossary. You can pause the video to give yourself time to do that. Okay, once you've found the definition, let's look at the definition of reserve and reservation next to each other so we can compare. Reserve means to save or put aside. Reservation, as a noun, is an area of land in the United States put aside for the use of American Indians. How are the words reserve and reservation connected? Reserve is an action and reservation is a thing. So take a moment to write these words and definitions in your vocabulary notebook. Let's write reserve, to save or put aside, and reservation as a noun, an area of land in the United States put aside for the use of American Indians. Pause the video to give yourself time to write these down. Let's take a look at the paragraph that we read earlier. Again, this is on page 38 of your Plains Indians book. In our core lessons, we discussed whether the impact of certain actions was negative or positive. We're going to reread the passage on page 38 one more time. This time, I want you to look for any words that show if creating reservations had a negative impact on American Indians or a positive impact? Okay, so we're looking for words that will help us understand if creating reservations had a negative impact on American Indians or a positive. Are you ready? Okay, I'm going to reread. Listen for those words. In the mid-1800s, the U.S. government tried to force Plains Indians to move to reservations. Reservations were public lands set aside as homelands for Indians. On reservations, the Plains Indians would have to give up many of their traditional ways of life and depend on the government for support. Were there any words or phrases that made you think, oh, you know what? Creating reservations maybe wasn't such a good thing for American Indians. Maybe it didn't have a good impact. Maybe it had a negative impact. I notice it says force. Think about when someone forces you to do something. Is that enjoyable? No. If you don't want to do it and you're forced to do it, that might have a negative impact. We also see had to give up. When you have to give up something, that's usually negative. And in this case, it's negative. And then we have, they have to depend on the government for support. So they don't get to be independent anymore. They have to depend on or rely on the government to support them. So those are some phrases or words that show a negative impact. Okay, we're coming in for a landing here. What were some ways that we learned more about the word reservation? What did we do today that helped us learn more about this word? We looked at the base word reserve, and that helped us. You also looked up the word in the glossary, and we looked for clues around the word in the text. I have one more question for you. How did the American Indians' nomadic lifestyle change because of the reservations? How did creating reservations cause their nomadic lifestyle, nomadic meaning, yes, that they're moving around, moving from place to place, how did that change because of the reservations? Yeah, before, lots of Indians roamed from place to place chasing the buffalo. Then the settlers started killing the buffalo and taking the Indians' land and putting them on reservations. The impact was that they had to give up their traditions. Many also became poor and sick. Okay, you don't have to write this anywhere, so the only thing you needed to write today were the definitions of reserve and reservation in your vocabulary notebook. If you did that, then you are done with the deep dive. Thank you for doing your best and have a wonderful rest of your day.